This is a follow-up, a recap, as well as go into part 2 of the hyperdimensional conflict. Again, I'm going to be recapping the important parts, or a portion of the important parts, the way I see it, in regards to part 1, and then go into part 2. So, here I go. Spirit is what animates all things. It is the reason for what is called creation. Now, you can call it whatever you want. You can call spirit energy. You can use the word consciousness. You can use creational energy. It's all good because it's all the same thing. Whatever helps you to connect to the understanding that the material universe, as we perceive it here in the third density, comes into being through an ongoing, incessant focus. It is part of a collective effort that has gone on for a very, 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 very infinitum long time. And it's the focus that of the immortal spiritual being, which you are, which I am, and that in turn fuels the creation. In other words, it keeps it going. It remains an ongoing process, that fueling, if you will. It must be an ongoing process for it to continue to exist. It must have that energy source coming into it in order for it to exist. If it doesn't, then no longer power, no longer focus within that particular area, and it disappears. I prefer to use the word spirit, because it just helps me to identify with who and what we are. I'll be using it a lot, so, all these terms are good, but I'm just going to be using that particular one. So here we go. Spirit, or spiritual energy, is the source. A lot of questions out there. What is the source? Who is the source? Yada, yada, yada. Well, we are, because we're spirit. Just like electricity, if you take an electron and a proton and you pull it out of a conduit, a flow of electrical current, does that proton and electron become any less electricity? Of course not. If you pull it out, it still remains part of it regardless. Okay, so that is what we are. We're all part of the one in that regard. We're all connected, yet in our natural state, that is a formless. Using the word formless needs to be beat over the head, unfortunately, because when I say that, people just kind of go, they glaze over and they just don't get it. It's a formless non-entity. That's what we truly are in our natural state. And here's a clincher. All-knowing and all-powerful within that state. That flies in the face of religious doctrine, because that's not what's presented here on this planet. But that is the truth. That is the truth. Spirit is not created, yet it transmutes. It subdivides. And I'll explain that here in a little bit. Again, this is a recap, obviously, of part 1. But let me continue here. Again, spirit or spiritual energy is the source. Source is not independent of the immortal spiritual being, but part of the whole of what they are. Again, you can use the word creational energy, you can use spiritual energy. These all terms, it's all good. They all work because it's all the same thing. To understand spirit, consciousness, creation is to understand that the immortal spiritual being becomes, here it is, the very thing it believes it is, wants, or believes that it should be. Again, who are the creators? Immortal spiritual beings. What is an immortal spiritual being? Again, well, in its natural state of being, it is a formless non-entity, all-knowing, all-powerful, which varies in power and abilities, which I'll get into a little bit later, and is able to be inside and outside of its creation by subdividing itself through the projection of self and transmutation of personas. Again, the immortal spiritual being becomes the very thing that it believes that it is, wants, or believes that it should be. Okay, I'm going to proceed with part 2, the hyperdimensional conflict, the development and engineering of life forms, bodies and forms. Now, people, that is to say spiritual beings that believe that they are the body they occupy, well, they become the body. Why is that? It's due to several reasons. First reason, and the main one really, is due to programming. During lifetime to lifetime transition, the memory is erased and the identity is removed. There's a residual and there's a recallability, but it's fragmented. And it's also part of the system in regards to the programming. In other words, there's a lot of false memories instilled. Okay, so that is the main reason. So you have a being coming into a vessel that is a biological vessel. And because the vessel is self-replicating, in other words, it's born. It wasn't always like that. Plants, animals, bodies, whatever, they were, in the beginning, they were not self-replicating. That's a engineering design that came later down the road. But anyhow, point is that they think that they're new. Spirit is not born. It's just put in a position or in a state of illusion, believing that it is born. Because again, the immortal spiritual being becomes the very thing that it believes that it is, wants, or believes that it should be. So it's in this vessel, and it believes that it's new, and it has programs that are going to be running through it, and they will engage or they will be triggered by various things during the lifetime of that vessel, as well as enforced by other programs that exist around it through other beings that occupy the vessels that they're occupying, and so on and so forth, not to mention outside influence within other dimensions as well as densities, or should I, well, yeah. Anyhow, but so you have that going on as the main reason being programming. Now, or the second part of that would be, here's where the misconception takes place. And I just kind of mentioned this already, which is the biological vessel. It has certain aspects to its design. These have to do with manipulation of the vessel itself in order for it to be controlled by external sources. In other words, those that came along and decided to genetically manipulate certain vessels and, engineer them to their own purpose and devices in order to captivate other immortal spiritual beings and imprison them, so to speak, not so to speak, literally, in these vessels. And this has been going on for quite a long time. Again, spirit is not born, and they're not some other immortal spirit's creation. Only thing that the immortal spiritual being creates is creations as we see it in regards to experiencing realities and vicarious expressions of experience, such as a biological vessel and things of that sort. So, what attracts the spirit to a vessel? Okay, you have the process in which the spirit has been, its memory has been erased, its identity has been removed, it's been reprogrammed, and it's given a mission. And one of the missions is to go into this biological vessel. And there's like a magnetic effect in regards to the physical body, because it's an emotional body and it oscillates at a certain frequency. And one of the things that's attractive to a spirit to experience is the pain aesthetic of the frequency that body's giving off. And what I mean by that is, I mean the pleasure and pain centers of the emotional body. And so during the lifetime of this vessel, why the spirit is occupying, you have these different triggers taking place, activating programs, and being reinforced by, like I said, by other programs, as well as the body itself in regards to the emotional body and these different aspects of pleasure and suffering. It's really, initially this was a vicarious expression to reside within a biological vessel. It didn't have the same controlling elements that this particular one has. In other words, it didn't have, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it. It didn't have, the pineal gland. It didn't have the chakra system and stuff like that existing. All those are controlling elements, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. But again, this would be the reason why one would believe that they're the body. Their identity is removed. They think they're new, and they have all these controlling elements, compounding the idea of this being a reality that is that you're the body, and you're new, and so on and so forth, and this is the way it is, and there's no other reality outside of this. So, but again, this, I'm going to repeat this quote. The most important aspect to understand is that the immortal spiritual being becomes the very thing it believes it is, wants, or believes that it should be. The immortal spiritual being's source of power comes from the very creational energy that flows through them, or source. This is our way, our only way, to regaining true self, is to reconnect with that true essence of who we are. And it's not through the body, it's not through the enlightenment, through the pineal gland, it's not through these other modalities, quote unquote, that you hear used so much. Those are tricks. And those basically just pull you in and keep you confined within a fourth density reality. And trust me, the fourth density is very, what's the term for it? Convoluted? It's just like, I'll touch on that a little bit later, hopefully. Keep a reminder of that because it deals with so much. But point being simply is that our true essence is going to be obtained through going within. And it's not through mind energy, it's through heart energy. It's important to be able to take the mind energy and make it submissive to the spirit. Bring it down into the heart. And be able to put it in its place and have sovereignty over the vessel that you reside in. Not for it to rule you, but for you to rule it. This is how we begin to get back to true self. Again, an immortal spiritual being is a formless non-entity in its natural state. It's all-knowing and all-powerful in that natural state. Now, this does vary in power and abilities from one immortal spiritual being to another. But again, when in a creation, when it projects itself into a creation, it is able to be inside and outside of that creation by subdividing itself through projection of self and transmutations of personas or personifications. So how does an immortal spiritual being become all-knowing and all-powerful? Well, I guess one's understanding would vary based on one's perception, but in simplicity, it's a collective right. Again, in your natural state, this is how you are. Now, all immortal spiritual beings draw from the creational energy, therefore making us all equal in that sense. Again, the idea of this conduit stream of current flow of protons and electrons, which we call electricity. You pull that out, proton and electron, it's still part of that. Still part of that source. You see what I'm saying? We all make that up. All of us together, it's collective. It's being down here in this third density and all these programs and all these indoctrinations that keep you separated from that reality. So anyhow, we all pull from that same source, which makes us part of the one. Within this construct or universe, we have layers of frequencies or densities of varying oscillations. All of us individually vibrate within our own field of oscillation, most notably, especially within our natural state of being a formless non-entity. Our frequency there is very unique to ourselves. It is here as well, but it's because of the separation, or because we're in this lower portion of the universe, the feedback in regards to that oscillation, plus all the previous things I mentioned, keeps that reality from being connected to the true essence of self within those higher realms, if you will. Hold on a second here. I have to take a break. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, back to where I was at. Within the layers of frequencies that make up the division of this particular construct are dimensions which oscillate a great deal slower than others. The simple analogy for this would be, think of a keyboard. You go to your right on the keyboard and you hit the pitch at the very end. That'll be your highest pitch. And then you go all the way down the other side. You get the point, you hit that, and it's the lowest pitch. Well, the reason why this one is the highest is because it's oscillating faster, and this is oscillating the slowest based on your the frequency, the span of frequency you have to deal with, right? It's very similar in regards to the way this universe is laid out. You have a higher sense of oscillation or vibration, and then you have a lower sense of vibration down here as you go down to the lower densities. The lower the density, the slower the oscillation. Therefore, it takes longer for that wavelength to occur. And it's the same thing in regards to us. It takes longer to connect because of that separation or that length of oscillation. I use the word separation a lot because the feedback is so slow. Time you get a sense of recall, you lose it. Anyhow, so this particular construct is seen as having 12 densities. And again, using the term dimension and density as separate ways to define what's going on within these various frequencies is, I find, to be the better way for me to be able to communicate it, because I see dimensions, or a term that you would use that would imply an ongoing layer, if you will, within the density itself. So in certain densities you have a multi-layer of dimensions, or different type of aspects to it, as well as artificial constructs that exist in certain densities that may be perceived as being a dimension or a density of itself, but in truth they're actually artificial, in the same way that this light is artificial. It's a light, but it's not the sun. You follow my point. So anyhow, the lower the density or the oscillation, the greater sense of polarization or duality that occurs. In these higher densities you don't have good or evil. It doesn't exist. But down here, because of the long length of oscillation, you have this sense of separation in this concept of right and wrong, light, dark, good and evil. In simple terms, what we're experiencing here is division and conflict. It is what it is, but the objective here for me doing this series is to bring some sense of knowledge but the main reason is to give us a way out of that, a way out of that way of perception, so that we can connect with our true selves again and become free. Okay? There's many beings that traverse densities like 1 and 4. Again, let me backtrack. We have what is perceived as being 12 densities within this particular construct or universe, and we being in the third. So from densities 1 and 4, you have a lot of beings that are doing a lot of stuff, that are traversing these areas through technologies and various modalities. And many of these beings are responsible for the conflict on this planet. And yet they blamed us for doing it. It's part of the system. This system is an amnesia prison system. And there's a lot of... this world has been staged to look like a particular something, but in truth it's just like a actor stage. They're props in that respect. There's not a whole lot of history here that we can validate as being true history. It's been manipulated too much, and a lot of things have taken place just to pull the wool over our eyes and keep us clouded to the truth. So a lot of beings they're responsible for what's taken place here, and they wish to perpetuate these conditions for their benefit, which leads me back to the question that I posed in regards to, how does an immortal spiritual being become all-knowing and all-powerful? Well, as mentioned, in our natural state of being all-knowing and all-powerful, it is a common state we all share. Although in the subdivisions of self within these lower densities of this creation, the conditions greatly change and conflict becomes the game within duality. This is where beings now rule over other beings through enforcing of hierarchies in order to maintain / limit the flow of creational energy to us and other beings, so those beings can hold power over us. And in other words, beings are being used, as conduits of energy, so other beings could feed off of them. It is what it is, man. They're using that because we all have that energy flow. Like I said, we're all part of the one. And down here, it's just conflicting because you have these personas and these egos that dominate. Again, the immortal spiritual being becomes the very thing it believes that it is, wants, or believes that it should be. And when it becomes a particular persona or personification, it becomes it. Especially if it has spent, eons and eons and eons of time within that identity. So this is where these beings that are in hierarchy position as rulers, this is where they get their spiritual power from, within these lower densities. They're living off of other beings. They're channeling it through worship, through all kinds of different areas. Okay? It is what it is. I'm going to call it for what it is. How does this take place now? Well, first we must look at this vessel or body we reside in. It is commonly accepted in certain circles that this particular suit, earth suit, has been genetically manipulated and / altered. That's pretty obvious. I will go back to the earlier stages of this universe to talk about how these various vessels throughout creation were developed or created, but for now, let the focus be on our present condition, because that's really what matters. One must ask at this point, why the ongoing manipulation of this vessel? Well, I just, alluded to the reasons why. In order for, basically in a word, control. What is the purpose of the pineal gland? What is the purpose of chakras? Well, I look at the pineal gland as a biological implant. This is part of the genetic engineering. And the chakra system as a, four-dimensional synthetic software program overlay. It's all part of the controlling factors in regards to this an amnesia prison system. I'm going to take a break here, and then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about bodies, and then close this out. Okay, bodies and forms. The focus here is to take your attention away from the idea of this vicarious expression, because this is not what you are, it's what you're occupying. As an example, if I were to go off and purchase a Ford Mustang 1965, which would be pretty sweet, by the way, and someone came along and gave me a 68 Shelby, and a friend of mine drove up in a 1969 Mach 1. Now, all those are Fords, right? But they're different models. There's a lot of focus on the biology and the idea of evolution. But evolution doesn't really exist. Everything that happens is a process over a long period of time, if you want to call it that way, but this stuff has been engineered. The bodies, plants, everything. In the beginning, when these things were being created or developed, they were not self-replicating. That's something that came later down the road. But you had different types, and they progressed. I'd like to call them, these as not being a form of species, but rather models. Now, if you look at it like a reptilian, and there's a lot of focus on this, and within that focus of the bodies, they look at evolution. Now, again, evolution is a deception. What they're looking at is not a process of evolution, such as an example. These beings have wings. These beings have a tail. These beings don't have a tail. They're basically the same type, but they're different models. They're not species, and those things that have taken place are not things that developed through the process of evolution. They're engineered that way. They're classes, they're suits, they're models. That's something to truly embrace in regards to knowing who you are, because as long as you connect with everything as being biological, and this evolved from this, and this was created because of this, and not knowing the true essence of who you are, you will be stuck in those personifications and never connect with your true self. I see a lot of individuals out there that talks about this stuff, that's been at this for a long time, and they're still stuck in the biology. They're still looking at these different models as if these things evolved. And I listen to other things that they say, and they should know better, but they're stuck. Like I said, the immortal spiritual being becomes the very thing that it believes that it is, it wants, and that it believes that it should be. What I would like you to take away from this particular part of this series is that go within self. Take command over your own physicality, over your own mind. Don't allow your body to control you. Don't allow your mind to control you. Go into your heart center. Reconnect with your true essence of who you are. Find your sovereignty and your sense of responsibility to self, in true self. Find that peace, because that's where it resides. You can take the mind and drop that energy into your heart. There's a process, just tapping yourself like this while you say out loud. You can count. It doesn't matter what you do. You can say all kinds of mumbo jumbo. It doesn't make any difference. Sounds actually make a difference in respect to this particular construct, because it's one of frequency. So by your spirit, you command certain things by your gestures and the way you do stuff. Okay? So you can command your mind energy to come down into your heart. And then you'll feel this sense. How you know it works? Well, you'll know when peace comes over you. You'll feel it. You'll calm. It's a calm control. It's not bliss. Not like what some other individuals talk about with the Kundalini experience and all that stuff. That stuff has a lot to do with the body and these external sources and other influences from other beings. That would have nothing to do with that. You can find what you need inside yourself, and you don't need all those weird experiences to do that. This stuff is dangerous, by the way, in my opinion, because you're inviting things in you have no idea, have no clue. Trust me, this is a amnesia prison system, and there's a lot of manipulation going on here, and there's a lot of parasitical activity taking place here. So reconnect with yourself. Know that the true essence of who you are. Like I said, you're in your true essence. You are a formless non-entity, all-knowing, all-powerful, part of the one of all things. You are the source. You're part of it. You're connected with it. You're not a little bit part of it. You're all part of it. That's the way it is. We're all part of it. It's everything down here, even through all its suffering and all the horrible things that take place. It's something that has been agreed upon in order for it to happen. Well, you don't have to agree with it anymore. You can disconnect from that, and you can reconnect with your higher sense of self, if you want to use that term. I don't really like using that because it's just what you are is what you are. But as far as in the higher oscillations, I guess you'd say it that way, right? Sure. But you want to reconnect. You want to get back to to know who you are. And that part of you, no being can ever take away from you. And, enough of this stuff down here. Let's just get back on track, to the real stuff and have a peaceful and righteous existence. So peace, everybody. See you next time. Take care.